Retro.
What's up, guys? This is Daniel Logan, Boba Fett from Attack of the Clones, The Clone Wars, Book of Boba, Skywalker Saga game, and hopefully many more things in the Star Wars galaxy. You are listening to Jay and Dennis on Podcast Stardust. Yep, this is the way I've spoken.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
All right, it's Friday, so we're going to be wrapping up this week with a review of episodes 3 and 4 of Maul, Shadow Lord. So before we get to Janix, Jay, we'll go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are.
Well, you can find us in this galaxy on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the dish is aligned, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, and we're now broadcasting to the galaxy. So we're talking about episodes 3 and 4 of Maul Shadow Lord, which are called Whispers in the Unknown and Pride and Vengeance. So before we get into all of the details here, you want to go ahead and share your non-spoiler thoughts about these two episodes, Jay?
Yeah, and I gotta say, episodes 3 and 4 are really where the show is starting to click for me.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I didn't know kind of where we were going in the direction based on obviously episodes 1 and 2, but it just feels like it's hitting its pace. You know, the tone is definitely making its fingerprint, I guess you could say. It's especially what they're dealing with and what they're doing with Devon. Obviously, there's a lot going on with her. And then Lawson, I'm going to say his storyline is actually really cool. And it's grounding the series in some realism that people can relate to, I guess you could say, and balancing some things in his life. And I just think that it's just awesome. And Maul is just great. I had a great time with both of these. I really did.
Yeah. For me, the show has been consistently, and I'm not saying you said the opposite, but it's been consistently great since the first one. I've just been enthralled by this. I've watched all the episodes at least twice. I was going through a third rewatch before we recorded this episode this morning. I didn't get through all of it. I just ran out of time. There's a lot going on. And I cannot get enough of this. There's some things that we'll talk about in more detail here in a bit, but Maul has become such a nuanced, interesting character that is, I don't want to say a far cry, but much different than how he was initially portrayed in the Phantom Menace, which was kind of Palpatine's attack dog in this,
Right.
It's, Maul, escaped people that I want caught, go get them. Maul, interloping Jedi, go kill them, that type of a thing. And he got so little dialogue in that movie that he didn't get an opportunity to really develop and demonstrate. It was just all brute force for that character for the most part. He demonstrated some bounty hunting skills, or at least those pro droids on Tatooine and the like. But from there to here, what we've seen of him on the Clone Wars and Rebels, and now this, he's really, really developed into somebody who's quite fascinating. That honestly makes much more sense as a Sith apprentice than just, even than Savage Opress. I mean, Savage, when we just talked about those episodes not too long ago from the Clone Wars, where he was introduced and he was created to be this brute force attack dog that was going to work with Count Dooku for the most part. And he constantly was making bad decisions. He was sent after King Katunko and supposed to bring him back alive. And he got frustrated and snapped his neck, and brought him back dead. And Maul is just above all that. He is playing chess games with everybody. He is thinking long term, the way that Palpatine did. And he's such a fascinating. And I bring all that up because so much of that comes out in these two episodes.
Yes.
And I just can't get enough of it.
No, I totally agree with you. And the thing of it is that Maul feels so different in these 2 episodes, but yet so much the same. I mean, it's just
Mhm.
deepening his character arc even just that much more. And I mean, arguably, he's one of the most consistently written characters, I think, in all of Star Wars. And, even though we've had bits and chunks of him here and there and everywhere, when you start pulling those threads together, it really does weave one complete picture,
Mhm.
and this series is just really, really deepening that. And what's awesome about it, and we'll get into that, is that his trauma defines him, and he even says that in this episode in so many words, and that's where his entire story, rotates around. That's the nucleus of what he is. And, it's crazy. Like you said, he went basically from wasted villain to arguably one of the best characters in the franchise right now. And
Yeah.
that might be a hot take, but I'm putting that out there.
It's funny, you should say that. One of our listeners that we've been quoting quite a bit recently, Trisha, sent me a message earlier today that said, I'm a lightsaber opponent, but have been trying to embrace all Star Wars. With that said, I was an OG girly until Maul. I love that we are getting more of him. He may be my favorite bad boy now. And a little blushing emoji, thoughts. And so I was like, it's
Yeah.
funny. You sound like my co-host.
Yeah.
It's like, you're a bit of a Maul fangirl, which is not an insult to in these stretches of the imagination. And
Always
so,
been loving me some Maul. Yeah.
yeah.
What
So,
is it about that? First
yeah.
Bane and now Maul, but it's all good.
Well, and, here's the thing. It's like they've been consistent with Maul's character since Clone Wars, no doubt, but they are just getting to so much more detail now because the
Mhm.
show he's the main character of the show. And so, like I said, I keep using that word nuance here. And, well, okay, let's start to get into some details because we're now 6 minutes into this and we're
We're in the
treading on that
weeds.
already. Yeah, safe to say that we both like these episodes. If you haven't seen them yet, go watch them and then come back for our discussion. So, with that, let's get on to it. You want to go ahead and give us the summary for episode 3, which is Whispers in the Unknown.
Absolutely. Maul begins his attempts to recruit Devon as an apprentice with a tea service in his lair. He focuses on her lost destiny and the fact that they have a common enemy, but Devon professes to be not like him. Meanwhile, Brander Lawson continues his investigation and search for the Shadow Syndicate while balancing the needs of his family. Finally, Rook Cast and the Shadow Syndicate lay the foundation for a trap to be sprung on the Pikes by having Ludi Vario contact Marg Krim.
So, a fantastic episode here. And this tea service that the whole thing starts with is really fascinating the way it all develops because Dawson has escaped from her cell. That was the end of the previous episode. And she's just kind of wandering around the lair. Ludi sees her. It's like, hey, how did you get out? And, she doesn't even acknowledge him. And Rookcast, just with a nod of the head, just directs her to go down this passage where Maul is kneeling and preparing tea, Cassius tea. I'm not sure if that's something we're supposed to know already or not. But regardless, it's there's a formality to this whole thing where he's, my name, you know who I am, but I don't know your name. So you kind of have a disadvantage, and it would be proper. He's talking about this etiquette in a way, all this, and he's very deliberate with his motions, the way he's preparing everything, and then sniffing the tea and making the offer to her and inviting her to sit, and then they engage in this discussion. But what did you think about this service?
Well, kind of going back to what you originally said about Devon when she escaped and Rook Cast just sort of giving her that nod. I
Mhm.
also noticed, just a quick aside, how scarred Rook Cast's armor has become, especially the helmet. So I really want to know some backstory on that, of course.
Mhm.
But with this whole tea service, it's such a weirdly calm, elegant moment for Maul, and that's what makes him even more unsettling. And the idea that he's recruiting her through conversation instead of fear feels very Sith, but in a quieter, more dangerous kind of way. It's like you mentioned before, it's almost a Palpatine style manipulation. This, you can almost liken this to the opera scene,
Mhm.
in Revenge of the Sith in a lot of ways. But as far as the tea service itself goes, with Japanese tradition, which a lot of Star Wars is actually based on, different tea ceremonies are extremely important for establishing different sorts of types of relationships and communication and whatnot. And I did look up the Cassius tea, and it doesn't seem to be that there's any distinct origin for it in Star Wars anyways. There is actually like a Cassius tea that exists in our time. It has like cinnamon and some other kinds of things in it. But my feeling was, with him being brought up on Dathomir, was this something that they did there, or was this something that he picked up later? Because you don't necessarily think of this as being something that was done in the Night Brother village, but maybe it was, maybe it was kind of a peace offering and kind of, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a good thought. I was interpreting this as a lesson that he had learned from Palpatine that he was using. When you talked about the similarities to what happened in the Opera House, but this scene reminded me a lot of the conversations between Palpatine and Anakin with, the presenting alternate ideas, that Palpatine would challenge Anakin's belief in what the Jedi were and what their true aims were and what the Sith were and how they were not so different. Maul's doing something very similar here, right? He's pointing out the similarities they have. I was cast out by my master. My mother was murdered. My brother was murdered. And look at you, the same guy has destroyed your order. And he's talking about the fragility of institutions and this, that, and the other, and pointing out that they have things in common, but it's not just that. He's also, when we had the non-spoiler part of the discussion, we were talking about how the portrayal of Maul changed from the Phantom Menace to what we know now. He's not just this attack dog. He is someone who has some civility to him. And, he says something to her along the lines of that, you are settled on who you believe I am. Would you like me to be that person? He's basically saying, you just think I'm this cold-blooded murderer that rages around with a lightsaber, and I'm not. Look at, he's demonstrating something different, but she's not buying any of this. The entire time all this is going on, she's being evasive in her answers, and she keeps eyeing his lightsaber until she summons it with the Force and then tries to get away.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where, obviously things kind of explode, but yet not. Maul is definitely testing her and almost toying with her in a lot of ways, with that, because obviously he could take her down hook, line, and sinker if he really wanted to,
And as soon as she does that, he clenches his fist, he uses the Force and extinguishes all the light except for the light coming from his lightsaber that she's currently holding. And he says, this is something I can work with. And it's exactly what he ends up doing while she's swinging around the dark looking for a way to get out. He's in there, kind of making all these suggestions to her again. How's it feel to wield a lightsaber again? And, she says something like, I'm not that foolish. And his response is, no, you're not, but you're untested. And then he keeps going after her, and he's striking this nerve about how she has a future that was taken from her, and she craves an unfulfilled destiny, and that this frustration is what's betraying her. And it's not like in this moment, but it'll come later. He's really scoring points that she doesn't want to acknowledge, because she's pointed out that it was in the prior episode that she still believes in the ideals of the Jedi. And he's kind of like, well, do you? He sees right through her. She's young, she's impressionable, and she's angry, like so many teenagers are when they feel the world's against them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, here's the thing too with that entire exchange and that entire scene, is that there's some things that Maul says, and I don't know if they were exactly said in the tea service or in the fight itself, but there were some different types of quotes that I had written down, and I wish I would have known exactly where they were from. But one of them was, "Power is not given, it's taken. You still think like prey. I have become the hunter. Mercy is a chain. I broke mine long ago." So yeah, those really resonate definitely in these moments, because when they are trying to when she's basically trying to fight him, it's not even, like I said, it's not even a competition, but it's just basically seeing what she's got.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
in many ways, not just physically, but psychologically.
Right. And then to finish these two off from this episode, at the end of the episode, she's made it to an exit, but she's blocked by Maul. And that same motif that we get, she's looks like she's found a way out or whatever, or there's an opportunity to leave. But then from the foreground, you see the shadow of Maul, the crown of his horns, come into the picture, and, he's blocked her off. And so they clash, and he's just like he was in the dark earlier. He's taunting her. He has no fear of this person, and he's fighting her with one arm behind his back this entire time.
Literally. Yep.
Yeah.
That makes a statement right there.
Right. And so he's continuing to lay on the temptation. It's not that you're afraid, it's that you're weak. You have no purpose, no hope. Your future was rough from him. So, and he goes, and you sit idle. And he's encouraging her to take action. And it really gets to her. That one point when she's been knocked over, she sits up and she just growls with frustration. And then he points out, you're one of the few Jedi left. That says something. And yet you squandered this gift, by refusing your call to fight. And so he's basically telling her, you have the tools, you have the means, you have the opportunity to get revenge, but you're not taking advantage of it. For what reason? An order that no longer exists. And so make something of yourself. Your life's in ruin right now. And he's scoring points, even if she doesn't want to admit it.
Oh yeah. You can tell how strained she is because all of that is going through her head, and she's really on the edge of becoming something else, but she's obviously not really needing, but Maul is trying to give her that push. It's almost as if to say, okay, well, the Jedi way doesn't really work anymore. So what now? And he's letting her kind of make that decision. But it's very similar to what he tried to do with Ezra too.
Yeah. Yeah. This was the beta version of that temptation to the dark
That's
side
a good
here.
way to look at it. Yeah.
Right. But one of the other things that's a cool detail here, and I don't know if you saw this on the internet in the past week, and some of the they've got various places, I can't remember where I saw it, kind of behind the scenes stuff about these episodes. Maul's lightsaber has incorporated yells and shouts from Sam Witwer into the sound effects of it.
Yeah, I did see that. And I was trying to listen for that in this episode and I couldn't detect it, but maybe I need to have like earbuds in or something. But did you
Well,
hear it?
not every time he swung a saber. I found it seemed like it was much more deliberate when he was swinging at Devon at the end of this episode. It was not like an angry snarl yet. It was more like rah, rah type of a thing there. It was much more of an emote from Sam Witwer than it was often just a straight out yell in that situation. But if you watch it with the closed captioning on, when he takes like his last swing and as she's getting ready to depart, the closed caption, there's some whispering in the background, and the closed captioning credits it to Maul's saber speaking in an alien voice.
Oh
is
my
what
gosh.
it says. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Right. And so I think it's only when he's doing something with and I haven't quite figured this all yet, because it also comes up in some of his most aggressive attacks against the Pikes later, but not every swing seems to have that noise, or if it does, it's the volume of it is so low that it's not as detectable there. But that was just such a cool addition to it. So yeah, if you want to get a good example, the end of this episode when he's fighting with Devon, especially right there near the end, if you're listening for it, you can hear it pretty well.
Oh, I'm going to have to go back and do that. And not to go off on too much of a tangent here, but do we know whose crystal or where his crystal came from? Like whose lightsaber crystal did he bleed? Because that would be fascinating to me too.
As far as I know, they haven't told that story, but
because that would be a cool thing to know.
Well, give us a Tales of the Sith so we can find that one out.
Yeah, for sure. Because, that is such a cool idea to explore, that the Kyber crystal itself could actually have sort of its own essence. I mean, has that ever been explored or even philosophized? Is that a word? Theorized, I guess, is the word I'm looking for.
Well, you think of Darth Vader when he bled Kirk and Falah's crystal. That crystal fought back and showed
that's
him
what I mean.
image. Right. So they are quasi living things that I think when connected to the Force. And so I think maybe it's the Force acting through them as opposed to any real sentience of the saber itself, or
Mhm.
the crystal itself, I should say.
Like a
Uh,
midichlorian thing.
maybe, yeah. I
Yeah.
think this is one of those things that they're going to keep intentionally vague from us
Right.
forever.
Like
Yeah,
the
I don't
whole Lotus arc, right?
exactly,
Like we were
exactly.
just
So,
discussing.
all right.
Oh, that's
Well,
super cool.
let's move on and talk a bit about Lawson in this episode. Him and Two Boots. So he's continuing his investigation. He had that meeting in the last episode with Rena, I think is what her name is. Yeah, Rena Soul,
Marina Soul. Mhm.
and got more information about this Shadow Syndicate. And he's got all that up on, if it was our galaxy, would be the whiteboard with all the pieces of yarn connecting everything. But instead,
Right.
it's a
Yep.
big video image there, and then Two Boats shows up with another cup of calf and says, "Oh, I see you've required more intel. Hopefully, it's not from one of your deviant contacts." So I love that line just because it is this subtle thing that takes like 3 seconds of the entire episode that kind of lets you know the way that Lawson does business, that he's cultivated these deviant contacts there that Two Boots does not approve of. But
Mhm.
it's like critical to the way Lawson does business. And his response is like, don't worry about my deviant contacts. And they are going through with things, and this is when Two Boots reminds Lawson that Riley, his son, has got a game and that he needs to get out there for the game, and he should definitely go to the game, and he'll keep an eye on things and continue to investigate here under this. So, and then we do get to see Riley at the game, and he interacts with his son before Iko Diodaki shows up, and then he gets a call that he has to respond to. So what did you think about Lawson in this episode?
He is such a standout for me, and I love the fact that he's grounded, almost it's almost like an Andor energy with the whole family thing, because that's, I think, the one of the first times, other than getting the relationship of Luke with Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru in A New Hope, "Oh, yeah, I wanna go to Tashi Station and pick up some power converters." There was, like, a balance or a kind of a shift in energy there. But for Lawson, I feel like it really raises the stakes of his character, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not just for him, it's not just stop the bad guys. It's what does this cost me personally? So he's really trying to balance that. And I feel for the guy, because
Mm-hmm.
he wants to stop the bad guys. He wants to do all the things, but yet he knows that with his relationship with his wife obviously being strained, she's off with the Empire, we find out that his son is really, really counting on him to just show up. And he does, but then he leaves right at that, moment when his son kind of needs him most to be there. And so that just kind of hits me where I live. And that's an awful feeling for him. I'm sure it's adding that constant pressure for him. And I think that with him just trying to hold that together, like I said, it's just so relatable. And with him and Two Boots together, I love this dynamic. Can I just say
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of I'm trying to decide what it really reminds me of in real life as far as other types of duos that we've seen. But we know calling the Empire mindset is a terrible idea.
Right.
And he keeps pushing for it. And eventually it happens. But he's such a wild card, Two Boots is. Like, just when you think, oh yeah, you better go to Riley's game, he wants to call the Empire, So it's he's on Lawson's side, not that he's ever not on his side, but he just has that droid protocol brain that keeps him from truly seeing the bigger picture. And poor Lawson, he never gets to finish a cup of calf,
No,
poor
he
guy.
does not. He's always being handed a fresh one. So, and just something, you know, th- the Lawson Two Boots relationship that you're talking about kind of reminded me of a few things: Han and Chewie, and
Okay.
Cassian and K2SO, for a
Yeah,
certain
I could
reason.
see that.
And this, the difference is it reminded me because there's a contrast in this situation where there's similarities and a contrast. Chewbacca is like the furry conscience of Han Solo walking around all the time. When Han wants to cut and run and do the personal, look out for the personal thing, it's that growl from Chewbacca that draws him back to what he needs to be doing. That reminds him that you really do, you are a good guy. You can't do that. And then, if you think about Cassian Andor and K2SO, it's K2 that is so incredibly practical, which is that, you're letting her keep it, the blaster that Jyn Erso comes up, you want to know the probability she'll use on you? Cassian's like, quiet, okay, it's high, it's very high. He knows the
Right.
protocols and he's reciting the protocols. So if you kind of merge those two relationships here, you kind of get Lawson and Two Boots, and that Lawson does very much have a conscience, and he understands the practicality of the way the galaxy works, just the same way that Han Solo does. That we have to be careful here. We have to tread lightly on this. We cannot attract too much attention and get the Empire here, because then they're going to take over everything, and it's going to be bad for everybody. But there is still that part of his conscience, which is expressed by Two Boots, which is, but this is the protocol. We know what we're supposed to do. We have rules for a reason. You need to follow the rules. But unlike Chewbacca, Two Boots is not necessarily thinking of the greater good in that way. It is he is thinking of what they need to do to protect people, but it is very much a by the book type of a thing, which is not Chewbacca. It's more similar to K2SO.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. So yeah, I'm sure there's so many others that we could pull from in different media too, because it's not really a good cop, bad cop kind of thing. It's just a good cop, different cop, I guess.
Different mindsets about what needs to be done to accomplish their goals there.
Yeah,
okay.
For sure.
Well, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time here because we got an entire another episode we need to discuss, but Rookcast is basically getting Ludovario to set up the Pikes. And so we see the beginnings of that here, which brings us to the next episode, Pride and Vengeance. So you want to go ahead and give us the summary of that one?
Yeah, absolutely. With the aid of some deception from Ludovario, Maul eliminates Marg Krim, the leader of Pikes. Back on Janix, Devon reunites with Jedi Master Io Diodaki, and they tip off Brander Lawson as to the location of Maul's hideout. Lawson assembles a strike team and moves in on the base. Maul makes an offer of protection to Lawson, which he refuses. A fight breaks out between the Shadow Syndicate and Lawson's team while the Jedi fight Maul. When the police reinforcements move in, the Shadow Syndicate withdraws. The episode ends with the arrival of the Empire.
Right. So the first discussion topic I had here is, again, this whole evolution of Maul from the Phantom Menace to now. And, I'm just thinking of how many of the materials that we had that came out in the Phantom Menace that are now legends, and even some of the comics that we've got that are currently canon, that all Maul wanted to do was prove his worth as a warrior and destroy Jedi. Yeah, and that's because everything else paled. He needed Force users here. But right now, dueling with the Jedi in this episode is not about destroying them. It's about negotiation. It's this is like Attack of the Clones, aggressive negotiations with a lightsaber is what this comes down to. And this entire time, he introduces himself to Master Daki, and it's almost like a pleased to meet your acquaintance. Here's what we have in common. We can coexist. We are not necessarily enemies type of stuff. And he's fighting harder than he did when it was just Devon, but he still isn't unleashing his full potential in this fight that he has with them.
Yeah, and my brain goes all different directions when I think about Maul, because I go back to that comment that was made about him being relatable. And we had debated that in one of our news stories, and we had talked about, well, how in the heck is he relatable? And I think some of that comes down to the fact that he just wants more for himself, obviously in what we would consider to be an evil way. Mm-hmm. As we've said before, bad guys don't think they're doing bad things. He just sees it as his way to gain back, as you said, that power and control that he lost, because he was always the one being manipulated. He was always the one being used. I said before, his trauma really defines him. And he even calls that out when he's talking to Devon, in the tea service. Why would villains, share that with you? That's almost, I don't want to say a weakness in a way, but pointing that out is it opens yourself up to allowing people in. But he does it in such a way that is manipulative. And so his evolution from the Phantom Menace to now, as I was saying earlier, he's been one of the most consistently written characters, his evolution has been just fantastic. And I love the fact that he changes between the projects that we've seen him in, but he's never really been rewritten. It's just been
Mhm.
built upon. And I applaud the writers, the team that has done that and has been consistent with him this entire time.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because, like, he's coming off as so understanding in these episodes, which is he's talking to them. It's like, you've survived, but you don't actually live. You're scraping by to get an existence. And with your powers and abilities, you should lead and be respected by all. You shouldn't be crawling around begging for food. And he's coming across as we have something in common. We're not enemies. You know, we'd have no real differences here other than our past. And he's basically telling them, what you understand my past is like really colored by what the Jedi have said about me, and they're gone. So can you really believe that? But what we all know as the viewer is that he's not really benevolent in this
Right.
at all.
Hmm.
It's he is doing what he has to survive. He's doing what he has to do to build up his syndicate. And so he makes the offer to Lawson because it would be a much better use of his resources if they came to a deal where they didn't have to fight. He didn't have to risk losing any of his people, and he didn't have to create any additional pressure on himself by wiping out a bunch of lawmen. And then when Lawson basically says, I can't accept that offer, and Maul even starts that whole conversation with them by saying, with Lawson by saying, I've come to recognize you as a man of intelligence and honor.
Yeah.
And then when Lawson refuses it, he's like, he basically, I can respect that. You're a man of honor. You have to obey your principles. I'm obviously paraphrasing here. And then he appeared by holotransmission. Then he disappears, let the Syndicate do what they need to do, because he hasn't seen them, but Maul knows the Jedi are nearby in this situation. And so he goes to deal with them. But again, I started this whole thing by trying to make this point that while he's saying things that come off as benevolent and come off as empathetic here, his ultimate goal is to build up the Syndicate, to convert Devon into a weapon. We saw that back in the first episode of the series, and get his revenge against Palpatine. And then what? It's, first, step one, rebuild the Syndicate. Step two, get an apprentice. Step three, step four, conquer the galaxy. It's it's the underpants gnomes from South Park, turned into Star Wars. That's what he was trying to do here. The ultimate goal is that, yeah, it's far easier to build his forces if he's not having to take care of the lawmen and bringing down that extra pressure on himself.
Oh, for sure. And what is fantastic about this whole thing is, you were likening Maul to Palpatine in some ways, in that he gets the long game.
Mm-hmm.
And even though, and I've likened him to Sisyphus so many times that just when he gets that boulder up the mountain, it just rolls right back down on him. He doesn't give up, but
Mm-hmm.
what he does is he doesn't just fight to win. He kind of fights to win another day. And I think that the moves that he's making here, like with Lawson and offering him this, and like you said, he just doesn't want that, these law people on his back for next time, and building up this horrible reputation in that way. He's building a reputation that serves him as a crime boss.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is so smart. And I've always said Maul is just wicked smart. And it's so true. So he's crafting that in such a way that he knows that it's going to serve him more down the road. Just like with him, using his fake out with his Knight brothers posing as
Mm-hmm.
him.
Yeah, that was the next
That
thing I was going to bring up. Yeah.
Yeah, think about how people are going to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
And, oh, did you hear about what Maul did? And he's got this and he's doing this. And wasn't that amazing? And, so it's really a myth building that he's doing. He's crafting this, like I said, his reputation, which is awesome.
Right. So speaking of that, when he took out Marg Krim at the beginning, how quickly did you catch on to what the plan was there?
Not right at first, I will be honest, which I think is either me just buying right into it and not looking between the lines, or just that good of writing. One of the
Mm-hmm.
two. It took me a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. How about you?
Well, I was watching this with Beth and Alec, and I can't remember which one of them pointed out that that wasn't Maul that was there.
Nice.
And I think when I heard Lou DiVario just saying, whispering to the Pikes, it's like, he's making me do it or whatever, like, setting up the trap, which was brilliant. He pulled that off perfectly. But
Mhm.
when we didn't see Maul's face, and, I think it was Icarus of the two Night Brothers, doesn't matter, but that came in just the way it was, just like this straight forward brutal attack without like using the force and doing a whole lot of leaping and jumping around type of thing. That's like, that's not Maul. That is not Maul. And then when Ludi stunned him in the back so easy, is like, okay, that's definitely not Maul. And
Mhm.
of course that was the whole point. It was a ruse to get the Pikes to lower their guard a little bit, and then of course Maul stepped in and used the force to eliminate Marg Krim there.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
Kind
No,
of
that was
interesting.
smart.
Yeah, I was trying to remember, and I didn't have an opportunity to go back and check. What Maul says essentially to Marg Krim's corpse, it's, after what happened on Mandalore, I came back here looking for support, and you tried to kill me, right? And so I was like,
Mhm.
did we get that story? I can't remember. I don't think that was in anything that we've seen.
I know, and I'm like, "Hmm." My little ears popped up like the dog
Yeah,
going, "Huh, squirrel?"
yeah, yeah.
I'm
So
glad you brought that up.
yeah, it's a story I think that still needs to be told at some point, and maybe it was, part of the plans for the Clone Wars that got jettisoned when they didn't know they were going to come back for a season 6 and season 7 at
Mhm.
someday. So who knows?
Mhm.
Who knows there? But he's taken the next step towards rebuilding his syndicate, which the Pikes were once a part of, and so he gets the survivors to swear loyalty to him, and then Captain Colt of the Pike Guard is now being left in charge there. So that's one step that we get along the way. Okay, so back to Lawson and Two Boots there. They get an anonymous. Actually, let's back up. Let's talk a bit about Devon and Iko Diodaki there. They get reunited. Daki returns Devon's lightsaber to her, and she thanks him for keeping it safe. And then they kind of go down into this like makeshift hideout that they built in the sewers. It's funny. Maul's trying to point out how they're not so different, and yeah, they both have high underground hideouts.
Right.
Maul's is in a
Mhm.
like subterranean lair somewhere, and the Jedi are living in the sewers. Essentially, is what it comes down to, or maybe a basement. I couldn't tell with some grading there. And Daki is already on to what she's thinking, which is that, the same thing that Maul can detect, he can detect that there is some sort of a craving for vengeance with Devon there. And while Maul is trying to take advantage of it, Daki is encouraging her, don't let your judgment be clouded by it. And there's almost a little bit of an agreement that I think makes Maul's message hit home for Devon here, where Devon's arguing that yeah, we could go get Maul, we could beat him, and this is what we do. We're Jedi, and then his response is, "But in the eyes of the galaxy, we are no longer defenders of justice
Oh,
here."
that gave me chills when I
Yeah.
heard it. Mhm.
So he's kind of brought the point that this is not our position anymore. What did you think of that statement when he made it?
Well, like I said, it gave me the chills. And obviously, Master Daki and Devin are at two very different points in their Jedi journey, if you will.
Hmm.
And, Diodaki is to the point where, or Daki, I keep calling him Diodaki. Daki is to the point where he is able to look back on what he's done as a Jedi and he's able to hold on to that philosophy because that's all he's ever known. And as you pointed out with Devin, she's a teenager and
Yeah.
she is very volatile. And, again, she's kind of questioning, okay, well, where's my place in all of this now? Especially now that my master is saying we don't have a place in the galaxy anymore like we used to. So, how does my Jedi philosophy and ideals really align with that? And maybe this other guy's got something, he's onto something here. Even though
Yeah.
it seems evil, it's a way out.
Yeah, to build on what you just said, yeah, Devin is a teenager. All she's known is the Clone Wars. at this point.
Yeah.
You know, that's what the Jedi do, is that they've been leading armies for the Republic. They've been participating in this gigantic galactic civil war. Whereas, as you pointed out, Iko Diodaki, he's old enough. I mean, you know, he's using essentially that stick as a cane, kind of like the Yoda effect, right? And probably
Mhm.
doesn't actually need it, but, you know, there it is. And he knows the Jedi Order from a time when they weren't generals and the like. And so he kind of seems to have realized the error of the Jedi's ways in this. When they led a war, they weren't really following the will of the Force. And now going after Maul is not necessarily the will of the Force
Right.
here. And
Mhm.
but Devon doesn't get that. You know, it's for her, you know, her impressionable era as a Jedi Padawan has been defined by a war. And for her, that's what the Jedi do. And so she's not ready to let that go. You know, Maul's absolutely right when he says that, you know, you are crave a destiny that was stolen from you. And why wouldn't she?
Mhm.
That's what she was trained to believe.
Right. And two observations about that. I mean, so like you said, Devon's mindset has always been a warrior mindset,
Mhm.
and she's not known anything else. And then I'm also wondering what Master Daki's species longevity is. How old is he? So
Yeah.
how much has he seen?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they keep calling him the dinosaur Jedi, so I got to believe he's long lived in this situation. For that reason, you and I were laughing off air. We used to do the Saber Masters promotion there, and they still send us emails, and they've created a lightsaber hilt that matches Daki's, but the image they used is like a velociraptor wearing a Jedi robe. It's
Right.
holding this lightsaber here. I just thought I'd share that because I got a good laugh when you and I were talking about it. But the yeah, so there's this definite difference there. And Devin is trying to be very, very proactive. And I wouldn't say that Daki's being reactive. He's just being more deliberate with what they do
Mhm.
and considering things, and don't be motivated by vengeance. You know, it is, you know, let's listen to the call from the Force. I'm speaking for him, based on what we see here. But, you know, he also had that meeting with Lawson at the end of the match in the previous episode, where he was trying to find out from Lawson about where Devin was, and he called her his niece because yeah. It's kind of funny. It's like Lawson saw him use the Force a couple episodes ago when he was holding
Mhm.
up that walkway that Maul collapsed, and it's not until the end of this episode where he catches them with their lightsabers drawn. And he's like, "So you're Jedi?" And why didn't you tell me? And Daki's like, "Well, I think the reason for that would be obvious here." But,
Mhm.
you know, there's a conversation that happens between Two Boots and Lawson where Two Boots is arguing for them to contact the Empire because the Republic would have sent a Jedi. And Lawson's retort to that is, well, this isn't the Republic. This is the Empire. This is not the way they do business. So they're clearly aware of who the Jedi are and things like that. But I feel like Lawson always knew. It was not until he saw the lightsabers that he had the definitive proof he wanted it. But what's your take?
Well, I think that was one of the reasons why Lawson is so, I don't know if the word is desperate necessarily, but I'll go with it here. He's so desperate to keep the Empire out of Janix because I think he does have a lot of empathy for people like Master Daki and Devin who are trying to escape the Empire. And that's why he doesn't want their presence there, because he can kind of see that, resiliency in them, and that they're just trying to rebuild who they are after everything had happened. So I think he feels a little empathy for that. And
Mhm.
I think part of that is also very personal because of the fact that we find out that his now estranged wife, I don't know, are they divorced? Did they say they were divorced, or are they just separated?
They haven't said one way or the other on that.
But yeah.
I think to me, it sounds like, you know, some sort of estrangement, whether it's ultimately, you know,
Mhm.
the ultimate estrangement, a divorce, whatever, but it's clearly a point of contention because Two Boots
Right.
brings up to Lawson that, you know, essentially asking if his judgment's clouded because about not bringing the Empire in because that's who his wife is working for right now.
Mhm. Mhm.
And Lawson's point is like, you know, leave her out of it. But then, you know, a couple episodes ago when Riley said he had spoken to his mom and that she wants him to come visit, Lawson says, "Well, wait till I can go with you there."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't sound like it's perfectly amicable, whatever the situation is, but it's probably not irreconcilable at this point. Maybe
Mhm.
close, but hard to say.
Mhm. Right. And I don't think that Lawson is necessarily on an ego trip, but I also think there's a part of him that feels like, well, if I bring in the empire and what if my wife becomes part of this whole thing, then it kind of shows her that I can't handle my own job.
That
You know what
could,
I mean?
yeah. I'm also wondering what else Lawson knows about, and I don't know if this is in the Shadows of Maul comic or what, but he clearly understands what it means to have the Empire show up on your world and intervene
Right.
in your affairs, and it's the last thing he wants. And I don't believe it's just because his wife is with the Empire and that they're having an issue. He goes so far to deactivate Two Boots when Two Boots sits down at that console and is starting to dial up the Empire there, because
Mhm.
and I think that's ultimately why he lets the Jedi go, because if he takes them in, there's no hiding their presence at this point. And it would definitely mean the Empire is coming. Little does he know that Two Boots has been reactivated and has gone ahead and called the Empire anyway. So I don't know if that would have
Mhm.
changed his mind, but it very much was a situation where, um, you know, let's not make things worse here if we don't
Right.
have to.
Right, because like I said, Lawson knows that that's a terrible we all know it's a terrible idea to
Yeah.
bring in the Empire. But what I'm questioning is obviously Lawson and Two Boots are close because Two Boots knows a lot of pretty intimate details about Lawson's life, with his relationship
Hmm.
with Riley and his wife and all of the things and even questioning like you said, is this clouding your judgment type of thing, but you almost wonder if Lawson is almost in a way, I don't know if the word is protecting Two Boots from what the Empire could bring down on them, and that's why he's not really sharing his true thoughts about why he doesn't want them there, because he's really not expressing that. He just says, "No, no, no, no. We can handle this. We can handle this." But he's not going any further with that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think a clue might be that, what's the name of his superior? It escapes me at the moment. The woman at the police HQ. She uh, points out earlier in this episode that, hey, your droid just went over your head, and she's in agreement with Lawson that they don't want the Empire coming in here and taking over things. Now, that could be the classic trope that you see in police procedurals where there's conflict between like the local authorities and the FBI or something like that. But she also seems to understand that the Empire showing up is not going to be good for anybody, because they'll just lock everything down, and everyone's going to suffer while they're around until they get what they want, and they may not leave once that happens. So I think there's both personal and practical reasons for Lawson doing what he wants to do, but it's just not an issue for Two Boots. It's like, this is the procedure. We are police. We have to follow the procedure, and it's frustrating to him that Lawson won't do it.
Mhm. Yeah.
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 All right. Well, we're about out of time. You want to go? Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap this up?
Well, just thinking more about Two Boots, I really appreciated the fact that whenever he was in frame, depending on what he was doing, they really made a point to focus on his boots.
Yeah.
They when he was kneeling down or when he was jumping off of something, like it would go straight to his boots.
Hmm.
So I just thought that was a nice little touch there.
Yeah. He's a
So,
great
oh,
character.
yeah, he is. And one other thing too, you're talking about trivia. When I don't remember who posted this on Instagram, so I apologize about that. But at any rate, they were showing Riley's um, piece of equipment that he uses, for his games,
Hmm.
and the same one was hanging in Anakin's little hovel in the Phantom
Oh,
Menace.
okay. That's a
So
good catch. Yeah.
yeah, so I was like, "Ooh, field hockey, is become like a space thing. Yay!"
The way that the announcers were going on, it's like, Riley, you're up. I was like, what are we playing? Are we playing baseball? Are we playing cricket? We playing lacrosse? Some of the equipment reminded me of lacrosse equipment. You know,
Mhm.
it- Probably some Star Wars game that they're not going to give us enough details of right now until it gets another reference or two, and we all insist, and then it'll become
Yes.
a thing in some, novel or comic or whatever, probably aimed at like young adults would be my guess, but
There
we'll
you
find
go.
out.
Yes,
Yeah.
lacrosse, not field hockey. I couldn't think of the name of the sport, so
Yeah.
but yeah, maybe it was just that he's coming in off the bench, who knows? We need
Right.
to read those comics. We really do, because I
Yeah.
I I would love to add that to our repertoire.
Well, we will have to find some time in our
Yeah,
otherwise
I
very
know.
busy schedule to do it because
You
we got
keep
a lot of things
saying
going
that. It's true. Our Star Wars cup continues to runneth over with not just Cassius tea, but all kinds of other fun things.
Right, right. Okay, well then I think that'll do it for this episode of Podcast Stardust and discussions of episodes 3 and 4 of Maul's Shadow Lord. Thank you all for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed the discussion. And if you did, please consider subscribing to the podcast if you haven't done so already. We really appreciate your ratings and reviews on whatever podcatcher it is that you use. If you're looking for more episodes of Podcast Stardust beyond the 200 or so that your podcatcher is likely to carry, please head over to retrozapp.com where you can find the entire back catalog of the show, as well as all the other shows that are on the network. So a lot of good stuff happening over there. Jay, you want to remind everybody what our social media contacts are one more time and where else we can be found online?
Yeah, you got it. We are on Facebook and Instagram, conveniently at Podcast Stardust as always. And you can always check out our plethora of Pinterest boards for all kinds of fun ideas for everything Star Wars. And while you're perusing the YouTube videos for all those fun behind the scenes kinds of things, why not subscribe to Podcast Stardust on YouTube and YouTube Music? Share those out. And we'd love to know also what you thought of these episodes. There's a way to leave some comments over there as well. And if you'd like to send us an email, maybe you've got some really long thoughts and some philosophical things to say, you can do that podcaststardust@gmail.com. And then if you are in need of some new Podcast Artist swag, and who isn't, you can head over to our TeePublic store, and we have 7 different show logo designs available on all kinds of fun products, from some apparel to some home goods and pretty much everything in between. So if you hit up the link in our show notes, it'll take you right to where you need to go.
All right. What's going on with cosplay?
Okay, well, as always, you can catch me on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay, and gearing up for some fun things this spring, looking at doing a May the 4th event on May 3rd, actually, because it's a Sunday. So be on the lookout for that as Ahsoka. And you can also catch me as 2 different versions of Hera, as well as my 4th sister and my original concept Mandalorian. So once again, that's at j.snipscosplay.
All right. So coming up on the show on Monday, we are getting into some recent Star Wars news. And then on Wednesday, it's our monthly feature looking at The Force Awakens as we celebrate its 10th anniversary. So we have a good guest all lined up for that. Make sure you join us for it. I think it'll be a great conversation. So with that having been said, thanks for listening to episode 1022 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great weekend. And until next time.